Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. During today's program, we will discuss recent decisions by the United States to apply pressure on the Islamic Republic of Iran in strategic effort by the United States administration to confront Tehran's aggressive regional policy that has challenged Washington's allies in the region. To do so, I'm joined here in the studio by Mr. Meir Javedanfar, who is an Iran lecturer at the IDC Herzliya. Welcome. I'd like also to welcome our TV7 analyst, Mr. Amir Oren, and Dr. Eldad Pardo, who is a research director at Impact SE and a lecturer on Iran at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Welcome. Mr. Oren, give us a broader understanding of the current situation between Washington and the Islamic Republic.
In the strategic parlance, there are two related terms, deterrence and compellence. And the new American strategy, which was unveiled a few weeks ago on the eve of President Trump's decision not to recertify the Iran nuclear deal, people around the world were anxious to find out how the administration is going to both deter and compel Iranian behavior. We have yet to see any coherent strategy because Iran is not really a top priority right now on the administration's agenda. Yes, of course, it is important. They speak about it. They have long-range plans. But right now, they are more occupied with other business, and it is yet to unfold.
Nevertheless, on the front of legalities, the United States and Washington has tried to bring about certain changes. Of course, the perception of the Revolutionary Guards, which are a key ingredient in the Islamic Republic's actions on foreign soils, and other angles and components of the Iranian regime. Mr. Javedanfar, how is that coming about?
Well, all we can see for now is that there are new sanctions, and they're very well. Some of them are duplicates of existing sanctions, but there are new sanctions, and they are a source of concern for the Iranians. But apart from that, America's not doing much. America's not involved too much in Syria. America is obviously not involved in Iraq and the whole issue of Kurdistan. I mean, the Kurds see them being as abandoned by America. Of course, the Americans disagree. But no, America's really not seen anywhere else. All that's seen, the sanctions, they will hurt Iran. But now we have to wait and see what happens during the upcoming visit of Vladimir Putin to Iran. And he's going to meet there with the supreme leader of Iran and also the president of Azerbaijan. I think for the Iranians, for now in Syria, there's not that much change in terms of what Trump is going to do.
Well, Dr. Pardo, would you agree with that?
Well, I think not doing is part of the American strategy. If you admit that there is an American strategy, some really question this. But the strategy was to change to, like in a judo move, to change the advantages that Iran was able to extract from the deal, meaning to not to include some vast areas they are not in the deal. So here you can pressure because they didn't include it in the deal, so they are open. And changing the balance of power before, until now, and actually from, I would say from 2011 or even before, the possibility of a deal gave Iran a leverage. If you do this, maybe we'll sign, maybe we'll not. And once we have the deal, if you do this to us, we will retract. Now it's the opposite. Iran holds on to the deal, and in America actually wants Iran to leave the deal, so they have the excuse to act. And from time, if time-wise, if you look at the time, there is time because there is a deal. So the U.S. can put the pressure gradually, and I'm sure they're also talking. You know, you have the October 13th declarations, but I'm not sure the Americans really want to break everything. So they just put pressure, they put focus. We didn't forget about this. Now the Iranians must be very careful. The Europeans also, you know, they say something, but on the other hand, they have other interests.
The Iranians have published what was supposed to be a secret, that during the General Assembly, President Trump wanted to meet President Rouhani. and Rouhani refused the meeting because this is part of the Iranian way in the bazaar. It's too soon to negotiate, to haggle the price. You must court me more before I will come and see you. But the Americans are obviously trying to drive a wedge between the Revolutionary Guards and the regime in general and the population by saying that the problem has to do with the IRGC, with General Qasem Soleimani, with the various businesses that the Revolutionary Guards have, and that these businesses are putting a lot of burdens on the Iranian economy, on the civilian economy. This is naive. Maybe this will help the extremists more than help the moderates because it is so transparent.
Is it naive, though, Mr. Javedanfar? Do the regime look at the situation between the core military front and the Revolutionary Guards as united in one aspect, or do they have many disagreements which actually challenge each other on the matter?
Well, there are disagreements. There are deep disagreements. It seems between the army and the IRGC in terms of what happens in Syria. We saw that there was a detachment of Iranian special forces from the army that was sent to Syria, and then the head of the army was interviewed, and he says the decision to send army forces was taken by another organization. He couldn't name names, but basically he's saying, I didn't take that decision. Mm-hmm. The IRGC took that decision for me.
And what kind of effect does this have?
For now, well, it seems that there are no longer army situation and army resources there. But I think what has been very important, and I have to strongly disagree with Mr. Amir Oren here, Trump has created cohesion in Iran. He's not creating differences. Obama was doing that. Obama was the master of that. With his smile, they were far more scared. The operating system of the Islamic Republic of Iran is not built to be compatible with America is our friend app. That app is not compatible. So every time that something resembling that comes, it freezes. Trump is putting everybody together when it comes to the to the Iranian nuclear program. And to be honest with you, I think that on the sanctions on IRGC, they take Trump seriously, the Iranians. But I don't think on the nuclear issue, they do take him seriously. America doesn't do business with Iran anyway. And let's just say America walks away. Europe is going to continue doing business with Iran.
Even if it would cost it significant amounts of money instead of dealing with the United States?
Why should it worry the Iranians if America walks away?
Well, if there are sanctions in place, obviously the Islamic Republic would be a leverage chip of the United States where the European Union would have to decide between the United States and the Islamic Republic.
I spoke, let me digress to China
Please.
For a moment. Before the deal was signed, I spoke to a Chinese expert, and I was going to put this in an op-ed. The Chinese have said that we will do, after a deal with Iran, we will do business with Iran anyway. So is Trump ready to go to a trade war against China over Iran? Telling Chinese companies that if you do business with Iran, you can't do business with me? I'm not so sure. Is Trump willing to go to a trade war with Europe? I'm not so sure. You know what? I'm not sure Trump is willing to go to a trade war against Boeing, which has $8 billion worth of aircraft sales with Iran. I think, please let me be honest, this whole thing on the nuclear deal, this is nonsense. It's based on a fantasy that you can get Iran to renegotiate. Iran is not going to renegotiate. America simply does not have the leverage to get Iran to renegotiate because the sanctions that got Iran to compromise cannot be reimposed. But on the IRGC, and this is where we should focus, America with the sanctions can do a lot to hurt the IRGC. And you know what? As long as America focuses on the IRGC, the people of Iran will cheer for America.
Dr. Pardo?
Yeah, I think I would agree with your last conclusion, but not with the rest of I published with Mosna Dan an article in 2007, and we did a wide research on sanctions, and we showed that Iran or every receiving country they like particularly authoritarian countries, they like sanctions, measured sanctions, because it creates a sense of emergency, cohesion, and the rest. So our conclusion was that you need crippling sanctions, military threats, and in the case of Iran, our analysis was that Iran is comparatively open if you compare it to North Korea and other Saddam's Iraq and other countries. There is civil society. There is a lot of open debate inside the regime, outside the regime, inside the Revolutionary Guards, outside the Revolutionary Guards. So. And actually, our prediction went well. It helped. However, the situation now has changed because Iran now is much more open, and the unhappiness is much wider. So you need much less pressure in order to influence Iran. You don't need the crippling sanction. If you just think, let's say, about Israel or Rabin and the reassessment of the Americans, or even today, the idea of widening Jerusalem. It's enough for the American to say a word, and Israeli public opinion will force the government to change. In Iran, it's not that the situation is not that automatic, but there is enough of a moderate pressure because the expectations today are much higher than 10 years ago.
Well, on that regard, of course, the United States has brought an approach where it talked about the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the nuclear agreement, as one component in plenty of components, including the ballistic missile issue and other things that the Europeans actually voiced that they're quite aligned with the United States on this. Will the United States try to find supporters or allies in different regions of this world in order to align themselves with a policy that would scrutinize Iran and apply pressure in order to diverse its attention to more positive development rather than regional meddling?
The United States is trying already to find such allies, such as Saudi Arabia, and perhaps they will find the new de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia, Prince Mohammed bin Salman, attentive to these demands. But this is not enough because the United States cannot promise anything in return. What the nuclear deal was supposed to bring was a period of stability. This window of 10, 12, perhaps 15 years in which investors always love stability, they love an horizon of growth. This was supposed to bring the stability to the region and obviously to the American-Iranian relationship.
Nevertheless, we saw this trip by U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, who visited Riyadh in Saudi Arabia and also Baghdad in Iraq. He met with the different leaders and tried to make a unity between Iraq and Saudi Arabia with regard to the Islamic Republic. What we actually saw as a reaction, Prime Minister al-Abadi traveling the next day to Tehran to meet with the supreme leader in a sense of we're not going to be part of this Washington alliance.
Because you just got down to the personal level. When Secretary Tillerson goes abroad, everybody knows that his own president tweeted so many ugly tweets against him because the secretary supposedly called the president a moron, and the president said, I'm willing to compete with him to see whose IQ is higher. And then President Trump's own standing is so low that if earlier we all expected the supreme leader Khamenei to pass from the scene sometime soon, now Khamenei may outlast Trump. So the fact that someone at the National Security Council put out a very nice staff-worked paper, that's all well and good. But if there is no political will and there is no political muscle behind it, these are empty words.
Mr. Javedanfar?
I think if the Iranians could hack into President Trump's tweets, they couldn't do as much damage to U.S. credibility as he's doing it with the
Regional credibility.
Well, regional credibility. But the nuclear deal wasn't supposed to bring stability. The nuclear deal was supposed to put tough inspections on the ground for Iran's nuclear program and to give us 15 years to learn about Iran's nuclear program. Obama never said, I'm going to give stability and moderation. He changed it just before the deal was signed, because stability depends on domestic Iranian politics, where there's anything but stability. The issue here is this. If you're going to negotiate with someone, what cards do you have? We're playing a game of poker here. The JCPOA, if you want to get Iran to do things you want regarding the nuclear program, you need to bring back the SWIFT sanctions. You need to bring back the sanctions that prohibit you from doing business with Iran's central bank over oil. You cannot do that. If whatever you do, those two sanctions cannot be reimposed. So what sanctions are going to force Iran to be able to renegotiate? On this earth, there do not exist the sanctions to do that, which is why, and let me bring in an article I read on the Jerusalem Post. The IDF top echelon does not want the nuclear negotiations to be renegotiated. So what's going on here? Here we have Prime Minister of Israel and the President of the United States taking a security issue and politicizing it. This is not about security. If it was about security, the IDF would want the deal to be changed. They are against it. But the issue here is this. If you want Iran to change its attitude in the region, we need to have some also root canal treatment here. And it's very difficult, and I'm not going to say it's possible. Arab countries in the region, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, need to start treating their Shia as equals. They need to win the soft war against the Iranian regime. Because the only reason why the Shia in those countries look at Iran is because they're persecuted. Believe me, Iran is nothing to be admired for these countries. Their economy of Saudi Arabia and Bahrain is far better than Iran. The only reason they look up to Iran is because of persecution. But also for now, I think the Iranian regime is doing itself great disservice by what's happening in Syria. I think the people of Arabs around the world, including Palestinians, are aware of the massacres and the gassing of Muslims that have taken place in Syria with Iranian backing of the Assad regime, and this has done terrible damage to the image of the Iranian regime.
Dr. Pardo?
First of all, I agree now 100%. Second of all, what I think that the game is not sanctioned in order to force Iran through sanctions. The American policy is intended to create this instability and pressure those Iranians who want to change or they want to open up the economy, open up the country, to go another step in the right direction and really change the policies regarding the nuclear. Even if we heard Rouhani's last speech, he said, okay, we will continue with the missiles, but not, without overly details. Of course, they'll have the missiles, and they'll have nuclear project, and they'll have influence in the region, and they will support freedom fighters. This will remain. The question is how much, how strict are all the details. Instead of just going to sleep and wake up in 15 years and seeing that, we have a nuclear power with hundreds of intercontinental missiles. No, there is haggling on every corner. And there is a struggle against the Revolutionary Guards. The Revolutionary Guards, they call them those who have the weapons and they have the money. So the question is for Iran to decide. And if you look back at Iranian history, some dynasties like the Parthians, they existed 500 years, the Sassanid 400 years, the Safavid 200 and so on. But there were also the Pahlavis were only 70 years. Nader Shah was very short time. And the Iranian people throughout history, when they decided that destiny is at work and this regime will go, they will go, like they did in 1941. They didn't go to fight. So I'm sure if there is a ground invasion, I don't predict that, but if there is a ground invasion, I wonder how many Iranians will go and fight for this regime. I don't know. It's not. It's the goal, the strategic goal of Khamenei and his and the regime is to keep this revolution for centuries
But
to
there's
come.
nothing that we have in our hands that can force them to make such strategic decisions as renegotiating
Because
the deal.
they know Khamenei is one of the top experts in the world in revolutionary theory. And he knows that if he continues the way he continues and he is not around, Iran will collapse, like it happened in the Shah
Mr. Oren?
time. So they want to change. And this is the major card of foreign people. Negotiation, pressure, and all that. Because it's Iranian interest and the regime's interest also.
Please.
The director of the Central Intelligence Agency, Mike Pompeo, made a very interesting and perhaps even strange speech a few weeks ago in Austin, Texas, at the University of Texas. He spoke about his own agency, the CIA, and in praising it as the tool, as the weapon of the American democracy, he compared it to the IRGC and to the Ministry of Intelligence and Security in Iran. And he said that the CIA is effective because it is in a democracy, while the Iranian counterparts have to keep the lead on the dissent within Iran, which means that for the United States, it is better that Iran stays a dictatorship rather than the reformists win over. However, it is not only a bilateral American-Iranian relationship. We saw last week that when President Putin of Russia visited Iran, we saw that Russia can play the balancing role between Iran and the United States. And Russia, too, is under several sanctions because of the Ukraine and other such misdeeds. So the United States is not free to dictate its will.
Mr. Javedanfar, you said earlier that the sanctions by the United States will hurt the Iranian economy. To what extent will it hurt the Iranian economy, and what are the Iranians truly wary of?
I think what they're concerned about is that the sanctions the most damage that they can do is they will make people who are weary of doing business in Iran even more scared. The people already in Iran doing business, they're going to continue. I'll give you an example. Companies, before they do big deals, they get a big bank to finance them. Total, because they couldn't get a top-tier bank to finance it, used their own cash reserves, $1 billion, $2 billion or something, to finance this deal. So people are going to do business. But I think they're going to deter investors. They're going to push investors away. And that's going to supposedly create problems for Iran. I think the bigger problem is this. As big companies are more unwilling to do business with Iran, the IRGC will take those projects. But we know that they don't have the expertise to complete some of those complicated and very technical projects. So it is hope that will force their hand, for example, to become more amenable when it comes to issues such as Syria. It won't have anywhere near the effect of the SWIFT sanctions or the sanctions against Iran's central bank that was imposed. But the issue here is this: everybody's talking about a revolution in Iran. There's a joke in Iran that these UFOs come back in 2,500. And they're walking down Valley As, this is a major, and he bumps into an Iranian. So he says, "So what's going on?" And the guy says, "What do you mean 3?" He says, "In 3 months, this regime will go." This is what people have been waiting, praying, hoping, but we have to understand we can't wait for that. What's important is that for us in Israel, is that the Iranian regime must understand that we will not allow them to build a base in Syria.
But one caveat, I'm not accusing Meir of a Western way of looking at Iran. However, we have had the experience of Iraq under Saddam in 1990, when the economy was getting weaker and weaker, and people outside Iran believed that this was going to make Saddam more amenable to reasoning. And the result was the opposite. He invaded Kuwait. The IRGC, if under pressure, could do something extreme, contrary to what we would have hoped and expected. Invade someone like Meir Javedanfar.
With what? With 150,000 soldiers that don't have much power to invade.
Dr. Pardo.
They had to go begging to Putin to save them in Syria, which is exactly what happened. They were losing in Syria, and if Putin had not come in, they would have lost Syria.
Exactly.
Dr. Pardo.
I just want to refer to the poker game. I think the Iranians are not Saddam Hussein, and they are playing chess. Actually, the first chess manual in history was written in Persian, even though the Iranians themselves agree that the chess was invented in India.
Thank God.
Please.
But there is a difficult to grasp combination with the ideology of this regime. On the one hand, there is a lot of mysticism, even school training in mysticism, and this constitution that force them to conquer the entire world and all that. But when it comes to tactics and strategy, they are very calculated. They are institutions. They are very thousands of universities, said Meir, and all of that. So I would say that this is a game of nuances, of pressure. And I can give you just one example. This is, if you look at Israel or Netanyahu's policies in general, Netanyahu plays on the card that Israel has some technological advantage. Israel is a tiny country. Still, most countries in the world do not prefer to give away the advantages of relations with Israel unless it's very important to them. So just imagine the United States. For a country, 80 million people, so much opportunities, to just even to lose the United States without sanctions is not a benefit. It's not a benefit.
But it's not enough to make them change the strategic changes that we want.
Well,
this is the issue here.
We're
talking about margins here. The margins are not as big as we want them to be. That's the issue.
Well, we're drawing near to the end of the program, so I'd like to give every one of you the opportunity for a closing statement. Mr. Oren, we'll start with you.
The moderates, or the relative moderates on both sides, perhaps all sides, are much closer to each other than they would have you believe by the formal declarations. Foreign Minister Javad Zarif and Secretary Rex Tillerson are probably closer to each other than their leaders, Trump and Khamenei. And the problem is to get what the moderates want to achieve through the body politic of both countries.
Mr. Javedanfar?
I think that the Iranian regime knows that it's in the extreme minority when it comes to its policies in Syria, which is why in Iran's media we see that many subjects are discussed, but the issue of Syria is censored. The same about the issue of missiles in Iran. It is censored, and I think as long as the Iranian regime knows that it's in a minority, it will use it as a survival technique to keep the regime.
Dr. Pardo?
Yeah, I think the main failure of Iran is paradoxically exactly what we heard now. It's Middle East policy. In 2011, Obama basically transferred the Middle East to Iranian hegemony and asked them to be the second Shah to manage the region. They failed totally. Wherever they touch, everything was broken. So now they have to reconsider.
Well, unfortunately, this is all the time that we have for today, so I'd like to thank Mr. Javedanfar, Mr. Oren, and Dr. Pardo for coming here today, and I'd like to thank our viewers as well, and we will see you next time. TV7 Israel's mission is to give you, our viewers, truthful information, which in effect will give you a chance to really understand what is happening in Israel and its region. If you are blessed by our programs and believe our mission to be important, we urge you to support us and become a voice for Israel. You can support us by going to our website at tv7israelnews.com. This program was made possible through your donations.